Hello, beautiful alchemist. Welcome to Reiki Radio. I am your host, Yolanda, and today we have an amazing guest. We're going to talk all about Reiki. Actually, the conversation expands into some aspects of Reiki that aren't commonly discussed. So I'm very excited for you to hear this episode. Our guest today's name is Marie Morohoshi, and Marie and I met in one of Franz's Shimpenden classes. I think it was last year. Yeah, well, it had to have been last year. But Marie is phenomenal. She's sharing beautiful work. She even does Reiki training in Mount Shasta in California. And it's really interesting to hear how she conducts that, how she prepares students, the purification practice that she takes them through. But you'll also hear about her pilgrimage to Mount Karama. You'll hear how she really makes the connection between, for all of us to consider, the way that meditation and Shintoism and being one with all there is, how it's expressed through Reiki so beautifully. So really looking forward to you hearing this episode. And don't forget, if you want to have a conversation with me and some other listeners after the shows, you can join me on Tuesdays at 4 p.m. Pacific, which is 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Reiki roundtables. It is live and you can access the Zoom link for that on the app. So be sure to go to the App Store if you have an iPhone, or if you have an Android, go to the Google Play and download the Energetic Alchemist app. There's lots of free content there. You also have a membership option to access more tools to support your energetic alchemy. So I look forward to chatting with you live. Hope you enjoy this episode, and I will see you on the other side.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Reiki Radio. This is going to be a fun episode, just so you know. We are here with the beautiful Marie Morohoshi. Did I say that correctly?
Yes,
Morohoshi.
Morohoshi. Just roll the R a little bit.
Morohoshi.
Yeah, there you go. Bing, bing.
Get it? Yeah. Well, I am so thankful that we get to sit down and have this conversation. Just so everyone knows, we actually met in one of Franz's classes in Los Angeles, and you are just an amazing spirit. And so I want to thank you first for taking the time to come be on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you, Yolanda, for even reaching out.
Yeah.
Seriously. Yeah, this is going to be fun. And I've been kind of following you since we met, too. So I was like, oh my God, this is going to be fun because Yolanda asked some really good questions.
Well, honey, I
No,
have a ton for you.
oh, okay. Go easy, honey. Go easy.
And no way, Marie, no way. Because your story, your background, everything, there's just so much to dig into. Even just reading your bio, I was like, where do I even start with her? But where I want to start, interestingly enough, is you are the founder of Starnation Reiki. And I know you have a very interesting meaning behind the name of your business. So could you, first of all, just tell us how you came to Starnation Reiki?
Yes, how did I come to it? So my last name is Morohoshi, and so that basically Hoshi means star, and the part of Moro means basically the whole constellation or a group of. And because I'd been part of a indigenous Lakota two spirit Sundance community, I would refer to it as Star Nation. So when I went to my first Sundance ceremony in South Dakota at Pine Ridge, there was like a group of Japanese sun dancers that had come from Japan, and they're part of the annual Sundance ceremony there. And they were just kind of curious about me, and they're like, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And they asked me my name, and I told them my name, and they're like, "Oh, Star Nation, you're from the Star Nation." I'm like, "Yeah, hi." and, and then so ever since then, and then also being part of my Sundance community, Star Nation just always stuck.
Yeah.
So, of course, with my practice, then came Starnation Reiki, and that's how the name was birthed. It was kind of a no-brainer.
Oh, that's pretty amazing. But now I'm so curious. What is a Sundance ceremony?
So I'm a guest. I'm not Lakota, right?
Uh-huh.
So it was probably about 15 years ago, I was invited to my first Sundance ceremony. And it was a two-spirit Lakota Sundance ceremony. And I got initiated basically
Oh,
in my
wow.
first year. And I'm not, I don't know if it's an Aquarian thing, but I don't really like commitment, kind of like to play by ear and see how things go. And so part of the ceremony is that at the end of each ceremony, you make a commitment. And I never would make a commitment, but guess what? Every year I came back. And
Wow.
I was always drawn to the fire. So I ended up tending the sacred fire every year. And then at some point, again, as a guest, I was plucked to be the Sundance fire chief, which is not, not an easy task. And I had a lot of reservations around that. So I mean, this could lead into the hero's journey where I do the resistance part because I have a lot of stories around, oh, Marie, we're going to ask you to do this. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. No, no. And, I'm digging my heels, not wanting to do it. But this ceremony pretty much saved my life.
Wow.
Yeah, it's such a deep reverent. It's just all reverence for nature. There's a saying that I think a lot of people know since Standing Rock, there's been a lot of you know awareness and consciousness raising around indigenous life ways, and the saying is mitakuye oyasin, which essentially means all my relations. So in that ceremony we learn how everything is so connected, whether it's the ancestor rocks that we put in the fire to the water that we pour on it, and from the steam that comes from it, and the prayers that we sing that carries the prayers up to creator. I mean, I mean, I'm getting chills down my legs just thinking about it because it's such a powerful experience. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so drawn to it, because it's deeply embedded in prayer and ceremony and the healing of the collective and the people and the planet.
It's interesting hearing you say that right away. Hearing about the connection with the rocks and the steam going up to spirit. It reminds me a lot of the Reiki kanji with the at the bottom with the rice and the steam and the
Yes.
yeah, yeah. Yes. But
Yeah.
so I mean that's fascinating that that's even, I think a lot of times, some of us were very fortunate to be brought into, different experiences and even exposure to different traditions that perhaps we wouldn't typically have connection with. So, that's so beautiful. And I know that this also kind of incorporates in some of your Reiki that you do in Mount Shasta, which we'll get to. I don't want to skip ahead, but yes, she trains people in Mount Shasta. But I wanted to back up a little bit and share a little bit about just your background. So, where you're from, and even in your bio, I didn't know Gardenia was one of the second largest Japanese
Oh
American
yeah.
communities. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, could you tell us a little bit about your background and what even, well, just your background first?
Yeah. So growing up I was born and raised in Torrance and Gardena, two cities that border each other. And it's a suburb in LA, maybe like 20 minutes south of LAX. But at one point, and I believe during my time when I was growing up there, it was like the heyday of Japanese American culture. A lot of the I mean, my mom is from Japan. My dad was born here but raised in Japan. We only spoke Japanese at the house. My mom's been a long time Japanese school teacher at the Gardena Buddhist Church, so I was very very entrenched in the world of a life of a second generation, Japanese American. So there's also like three generations of Japanese Americans. So there's what you call the Shin Issei, which is like the newcomer, they just arrived, right? And then there's the Nisei, which is the children of those folks. And then there's like third, fourth generation. And so I was in that mix where Torrance was the public school, and there was a lot of like third, fourth generation Japanese Americans there. But then my mom had me on this program where every day after school, I would go to Japanese school and hang out with more like immigrant children like myself. Immigrant, well, a child of an immigrant, right?
Right.
So it's a very different sensibility. So with that came my mom's kind of a cultural fascist, you know. She'd be like, Kyoko, go look in the mirror, you know, who are you? Look in the mirror and see who you are. You know, she would had me on all these curriculums, and one of them was tea ceremony, which is Chado, which is the way of tea, which is very much rooted in Zen Buddhism, as well as Ikebana or Kado, the way of flowers, another Zen rooted practice. So, you know, while my friends were going off to like Girl Scouts or, you know, having a free weekend, I was like every Saturday, you know, on a tatami mat, bowing, doing my chants and mantras, and, you know, sitting in seiza or sitting in, you know, deep meditation position as a young child from, you know, the age of 6 or so. And just being really, yeah, on this path of like practice, practice, practice. And it's a, you know, Chado, the tea ceremony is very, very, it's super rigorous and it's very precise and there's no room for deviation. And what that taught me was like after so much practice, the mind goes empty. Like in Zen, they say, you know, you cut it off at the head, right? So at some point, you're just in the flow and it's absolutely precise. It's because you've done it so many times and there's no thinking involved. There's no thinking because the thinking actually gets in the way, you know? So being in this flow of no thoughts, no mind, and just being, yeah, taught me a lot. And even the structure of the placement of what you call dogu, that's the equipment, the tea kettle, you know, the tea container itself, the bamboo holder, all the things, the whisk, the placement of where things go is not by accident. It's very intentional. It's all in the flow. And I find that all those things have totally influenced the way I do my Reiki practice.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you about that because I had an opportunity to interview Inamoto Sensei, who teaches Reiki in Japan, and he is a Buddhist monk. Yeah, and he actually spoke a bit about that in the interview about these different ceremonies.
Uh-huh.
And it made me so curious because I thought, like, wow, the mindfulness that has to come in, you know, things that we tend to do just mindlessly, you know, like even making my cup of coffee in the morning, you know, I'm just like, half asleep, not even thinking about it. But considering how the impact of ritual and
Absolutely.
paying attention, how that influences our overall state of mind. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's really interesting to hear you share that because I imagine you must have seen so many correlations between what you learned growing up and then, of course, what we learn in Reiki. So, I wanted to ask you about that as well because of course here in a more westernized way of learning Reiki, a lot of the cultural resonance of it may be lost on us or not necessarily taught or, you know, and perhaps like if we're lucky, if we practice enough, we'll fall into some understanding of those things anyway. But how was that for you? Was Reiki something that just came out of the blue? Was it something that you sought out? How did you get to
Girl, okay. Another story. But before I get into that story, let me just make that connection between rigorous practice, precision, no thinking, and just setting up the container
right?
and taking that practice into Reiki, like you said, creates a phenomenal cumulative effect. Because once you
Yeah,
put everything in place, you know, you just drop everything. Then you just go right into the session. So the way I set up the Reiki sessions is like I have an altar. I feel like everybody has their own ceremony, you know, and because we live in such a capitalistic think kind of mode, it's really hard for clients to just drop into a no thinking place to receive the healing. So part of what I do is offer ritual. I offer ritual in the way that I set up a tea ceremony, for example. The altar is set up exactly the way it needs to be so that I can flow in a seamless way so that the client doesn't even hear me make a move. Like everything is in its place, you know, for a reason so that there is flow. And so that cumulative effect, your client's not going to know where the hell you are in the room, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and I also bring those practices to my Sundance ceremony and how I set up the fire, right? Everything I show up days in advance to set everything up so that there's flow. Yeah. And then there's also, yeah, yeah, I could just get into the details as a Japanese person, but I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, well, believe me, I'm going to ask more questions that dig even more, because I do have some questions even about the incorporation of like Shintoism, and again, what it is that you understand that you may bring to your classes. But I do want to know like how Reiki came on your radar in the first
Yeah.
place. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had been part of a meditation community, like an urban monastery. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that, but at the time, my partner, Angel Kyoto Williams, and I, we set up what we called the New Dharma Meditation Center in Oakland. And I was probably there for about a good 7 years, and I was coming out of it, and I was actually looking for a Japanese healing modality to practice. And I was looking for Reiki, but I couldn't really find a teacher. So I ended up going to the Acupressure Institute and I learned acupressure. And then then Reiki just kind of fell off my radar for a few years after that. And then I ended up going to Geneva, as I do regularly, because my good friend is there and my godchildren are there. So my friend Karen picks me up at the airport, right? One year, over like a decade ago. And she's like, girl, I just went to this like amazing Reiki retreat. It is so you, and you got to go. I'm going to sign you up and you're going to this thing because Jackie's offering it next week. And I'm like, oh, okay, sure. And then that's kind of how it started. I went and showed up for class. And it was a great little intimate class of 5 people. And Jacqueline Tail is someone who's, I think she's part Chinese, part Malay, and Singaporean and Mongolian. And she has a very fierce, like, shaman background.
Mm.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, I felt her vibe and I was like, whoa, this is a fierce sister, you know? So, anyway, so class starts. It's probably like day 2 or something. And we had just gotten attuned, and I'm out there in the cedar forest, where it's not like a forest, but it's a lot of greenery. So I'm just kind of communing with this one cedar tree, and I see what I clearly recognize as a staff. It is clearly a staff. And I already have a fire staff, so I'm already like, okay, no, this is a lot of responsibility. And in my head, I'm going, I am not picking that up. No way. And then there's this other voice that's like, oh, yes, you are. You need to pick that up. And I'm like, no, I'm not. And the voice is like, oh, yes, you are picking that up right now. And I'm like, damn it. So I'm looking around, make sure nobody's around. I pick it up. I go upstairs. I hide it. And the next day, I go back to class. And the teacher's like, oh, by the way, I kind of failed to announce this, but generally I always announce to the class who the elder is of the class. And there's actually technically older people
Right.
in the class. And she was like, I've already spoken with them, but I do a shamanic journey and they tell me who the elder is, and it's you. And I'm like, oh, damn. Okay. And then she says, so if you don't mind, I'd like to announce that to the class. And I'm like, oh no, really? Do you have to? And I was like, okay, fine. More surrendering, more resistance, more surrendering. And then I'm about to go in the class, and she's like, oh, by the way, did you see that staff that was in the hallway yesterday? And I was like, yeah. She goes, do you know where it is? I'm like, yeah, it's at the house. She's all like, oh, well, no, you need to bring that back. I'm like, why? She's like, oh, because you're going to lead the sacred walk. I'm like, oh man, so that whole experience of learning Reiki from Jackie was a very, it felt like an initiation, it was a lot of resistance, but there was also a lot of flow and a lot of familiarness. And even during the attunement, she was at the very end was kneeling in front of me. And at the end of it, she was like, okay, can you bless me? And I'm like, what? Is she talking to me? And I'm doing this thing again. I'm looking around like, she's talking to me, So I did a blessing, but again, it was like this initiation with the staff and the walk and the blessings. It just was, I was not expecting, and Yeah, so it's been a lot of surrendering to those kind of callings, and that's kind of how it all started.
It's interesting hearing you say, I mean, even mentioning the resistance, because now I'm curious of hindsight. Do you know what you were resistant to? Was it just that it was all unfamiliar, or was there something in you? Was it what you were feeling that was causing you to like question or be skeptical or?
Well, there was a definitely a feeling of like, uh-oh, like this is a big deal, right?
Mhm.
And meaning responsibility,
Right.
and um and then a question of like, wow, can I step up to that, you know? The question of, can I actually do that? I'm being called to do it, but can I actually deliver on it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And just the idea of responsibility just seems like I'm kind of lazy, actually, you know. I mean, my friends like, you're not lazy. I was like, no, actually I'm pretty lazy. So the resistance comes from like, oh wow, one more thing, right? One
Mhm.
more thing to be leading or being a big part of. But Reiki is all about being a vessel, clear vessel, and just following the calling, you know. And I've come to learn it's not about you. It really isn't. And I teach
Right.
that to my students all the time because they get so, caught up and insecure and in their head. And I say, excuse me, this is not about you.
Mhm.
We're all here to be of service. Our job is to stay squeaky clean bamboo as possible and get cracking, because there's work to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but this I have to bring up too, because I know that you do a lot of work within the queer community, and even we're going to talk a little bit later about the scholarship offering you have for the queer BIPOC youth. But I just wonder as well, I mean, aside from how Reiki may have supported you in your own path, once you tapped into this, after you did the class in Switzerland and all of it, was there some part of you, speaking of responsibility, of considering like, wow, how this could be integrated into the meditation program that you had started? Was there something already in you looking at the ways that whatever it was that was activated in you, how it could support other people and how those lines were connecting for you?
I'm kind of one of those like in the moment kind of folks. I don't do like a lot of like ahead visioning, although sometimes I do. But at that time, I was thinking, oh, okay, Reiki practice. But because I've always been an activist, there's
Yeah.
no way I'm going to separate myself out from, a healing practice from my activism.
Right.
So I was actually just when I started practicing and had come back from Switzerland, I I was asked to actually volunteer for the Healing Clinic Collective, which I eventually became a core member of. But they would set up these big pop-up clinics, and cater towards activists, people of color, the undocumented, those that underserved, those youth who are at risk, folks who generally would not be signing up for this kind of stuff.
Right.
So already bringing that healing modality to the people, not like I'm going to sit here and try to magnetize people. It's about
Uh-huh.
going directly to the people, to their neighborhoods, to where they live, where they
Right.
work, and bringing it there. And even like with the Tubbs fire, that was like in 2015. I mean, huge fire. It was like the biggest fire at the time, and it was all undocumented people. Those people were definitely not going to be showing up at no Red Cross to get any services.
Right.
So we went there, and so I feel like, and that has an interesting story too, because I do incorporate other practices. And that morning, I was picking up a friend who was an acupuncturist, and then another friend who, the founder of Ancestral Apothecary, who was bringing tinctures. And I happened to be growing because of my connection to the Sundance community. I was already growing tobacco and all kinds of different medicine in my backyard, and I had plant medicine for limpias. And something right before I got in my van, I was like, you know what? You might want to harvest some plantitas and go get that petitcon and rosemary and all the things. So I just harvested a bunch of branches and just went with it. And I remember feeling very kind of timid, like, okay, I'm just going to set myself up here in a chair and just kind of stand here and wait, you know? And I was watching everybody do their stuff and I was just standing there. And then one person showed up. Once it was on, it was on. And I remember looking up at one point and there was a long line of people, you know?
Wow.
And I was the last one to leave. Everybody had closed up shop. Sun was down and gone. And that's just testimony to like spirit just working through you. You know what I mean? So
Right.
to not work with, not to indulge the doubts, but really be in integrity and just ask for permission. Like, is this the right way to be showing up? And that's what I've learned from my Sundance community is it's all about deep reverence, respect, right relationship, reciprocity. So I do that with all the things. You know, I grow tobacco and I ask for permission, you know, when I walk on a path, you know, to connect with the ancestors of that place. Or if I want to harvest cedar, do ask permission, offer tobacco, and you know, and then move forward. And
It's so interesting, Marie, because what you're saying initially when you first started telling this part of the story, it reminded me of just how connecting a lot of the practices that we may put under the umbrella of spirituality, but how just connecting it all is, and just the humanness that emerges through all of it, you know. And going back to even how you mentioned in the beginning, even with the Lakota, with the Sundance ceremony, that recognition of being one with all there is. And, you know, it's like this work on all levels, no matter which cultural practices are being expressed. It goes beyond language. It goes beyond other modes of communication. It's just that spirit to spirit. And I don't know, something about what you said just reminded me of how beautiful the language of healing is, and the language of community, and the language of just recognizing the connection that we have that goes beyond all of the other layers. That's amazing.
yeah, you just let spirit move through you, you know. We're
Hmm.
just, you know, little vessels here for a short time trying to do the best we can.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I know, and I do want to go, like I said, deeper into some of the ways that you teach now and the training that you do in Mount Shasta. But I wanted to ask, so how then this progressed? So you went from the practices that you've already been familiar with, even what you've grown up in, and then what made you to decide to go deeper into your Reiki training to do Shimpenden?
Well, you know, I mean, the learning part or the teaching part?
Oh,
The learning,
both.
I'm always learning.
Yeah, both, both.
I'm constantly learning. I mean, I'm more a student than anything. I mean,
Yeah.
okay, I'm a teacher, but to be honest, yeah, I just feel like the field of learning is it's endless, you know,
Yes.
it's endless. But the teaching part, interestingly enough, I didn't seek out to teach either. Like I didn't
Mhm.
seek out to go learn Reiki in Geneva either. You know, I didn't seek out to get a staff here or there, none of that stuff. But same thing with teaching. I was somebody had asked me, I was at the Healing Clinic Collective working with people, and then, you know, there would be other practitioners there, other Reiki practitioners, and other practitioners started coming up to me afterwards and would ask me, you know, I really like working with you in your orbit, basically. And
Right.
do you teach? And I'm like, no. And but if you want to come over, I could teach you a couple tricks. So I started teaching people kind of like one-on-one in San Francisco here on unceded Yelamu Ohlone lands. And I call this place the Little Bernal Bubble. It's just, I feel like I'm in my little bubble here up on the hill. And so I would teach people one-on-one here, and then it started going out into groups. And then a dear friend of mine who became a good friend of mine, Belinda Liu, who runs the Histia Retreat Center, heard about me and booked a session with me and was like, girl, you got to come to my retreat center and do a training there. Yeah, and that's kind of how that all started. But again, everything was done not because I initiated it, but because I just happened to be somewhere at the right time at the right place, and people would just ask me.
Yeah.
That's
Isn't
like
it
a big
interesting how that
pattern.
happens? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If you asked
Yeah.
me like 5 years ago, no, not even 10 years ago, if I would be teaching this kind of stuff, I'd be like, what are you talking about?
And
You're
then here
welcome.
you are, but here
Yeah.
you are. So I wanted to ask you about as well, because you also had an opportunity to take a pilgrimage to Mount Karama. And if you could talk a little bit about that experience and how it was for you.
Yeah. So Kuramayama, um, I was there with my father, and at the time he was about to turn 100 years old. And I had like, yeah,
Wow.
I had a couple days to myself. I get to sneak out and like do my own thing. So I was like, I'm going to go do this pilgrimage. And my friend happened to be doing a retreat nearby, was visiting. And so we went together and it was on. I actually did like 2, 3 rounds of the whole thing. Like,
Hmm.
yeah, over 2, 3 days. And
Wow.
yeah, and there's something about my personal experience of being on a mountain and hiking. And I was like, what was it that Usui Sensei was feeling and experiencing, during his time on that mountain that led to this practice? And I felt like I kind of had almost like a flashback, like, this is not my first rodeo.
Mm.
That's how I also feel in Mount Shasta when I'm hiking. There's something about the energy of being in mountains and cedar forests, waterfalls that feels super familiar, that I could feel like my adrenaline starts to, like, I get really amped up and I start
Yeah.
like hiking faster. Like, and I don't know what it is. I'm not like an athletic person, but but I'll go to Standing Rock and be in the blizzard for like, 2 weeks and train some fire keepers over there at the Two Spirit Camp. I mean, I love being in nature.
Yes.
And there's something about an ascetic practice, the harshness of it, that makes me get in touch with who I am. So being on that pilgrimage was very much like that, and I had to get my butt back to the ryokan that at the bottom of the hill because we were on a schedule. And so I was sweating, sweating, sweating. Like it was a sweat lodge, but I was hiking, you know? And
Wow.
just finding these really amazing quiet spaces where he sat and just getting into deep meditation. I mean, that's really, at the end of the day, it's meditation. I
Yeah.
mean, that is the practice. That is the practice, whether it's practicing Reiki, that is a meditation.
Yeah.
With my clients, that's a meditation. Getting to, I mean, refining my presence, that's all through meditation. You know, it's
Yeah.
all, that's, yeah, yeah.
Well, I feel like you gave us a hint of that even when you were talking about the tea and the tea ceremony and the way of flowers, of going into such a deep practice that the mind just clears and thought goes out. And I'm glad that you bring this up because people listening, a lot of people that listen to the podcast are Reiki practitioners, some practicing for a while, some are very new to the practice. And I've noticed over the years, one of the challenges for people is getting out of their head and
Yep.
trying to do Reiki or overthinking while they're in the
Yep.
process. I mean, I had the same experience when I first started, and it really was leaning way more into my meditation practice that helped me to understand the way of Reiki. So I wanted to know if you could share a little bit around that in a way that may support someone that is struggling.
Absolutely. I tell some of my clients and my students, even if it's like for 5 minutes, just get your
Mhm.
sit on, you know what I mean? Because it's the consistency, right? So even if you're fighting and resisting all the way to the cushion, just get your butt on the cushion. And the mind will convince you not to get on the cushion. So for beginners, this is what I say. Just focus on your feet. Like you're in bed, right? Just focus on your feet, getting out of bed, walking over to the cushion. And you could be cussing yourself out. You could be like resisting all the way, but just focus on movement. You could be having all kinds of thoughts on the way, but just focus on moving your feet and getting your butt on the cushion and then just start.
Right.
Because then once you're on the cushion, the sit is on. It's
Yeah.
the point between A and B where the struggle happens, and where we often go like, nah, not happening right now. No, not
Right.
happening today. Not happening tomorrow. I'll do it later. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So if you indulge in just moving your feet and not so much your thoughts, then you will get yourself there.
I love that. Indulge in moving your feet, not so much your thoughts.
Yeah.
That's a huge one. So I want to make sure there's just so many things about your story that I want to make sure that we touch on, but to make sure this doesn't get left out at all, I would love to talk a little bit about your annual Reiki training in Mount Shasta, because you've mentioned the connection to nature and just how powerful it feels for you to be in the mountains. Being in California, I've heard of Mount Shasta, and it's on my to-do list. Like one day I hope to get there, of course. But could you tell everyone a little bit about Mount Shasta in of itself, and
Wow.
then
Yeah,
the
that's a whole podcast
preparation?
in and of
Oh,
itself.
yeah, from what I've heard, I believe it's true. But
Yeah.
and then bringing in, sharing a little bit of how you bring in the understanding of Shinto and some of the Lakota traditions and practices into the work.
Yeah, I would love to. And it's so loaded and it's so rich and there's so much to it, you know. But so starting off with Shasta itself, the first time I went up there and I camped up there in Panther Meadows, I remember we were there for like a week and it was time to come down the mountain and get back home. And you know what? It took us like 3, 4 times to like try to leave and then we finally left because I had guests coming to my house and I had to let them in. So
Yeah.
but there's a pool there. There's something about there's like a vortex there that pulls you in and you feel like you're definitely on a different plane. And during my trips there, I started seeing, and I also saw it at Kuramayama, and then eventually other places. But there would be these light beings,
Hmm.
and and I also invoke those light beings during my sessions as well as deities
Yes.
and guides and helpers who assist us during these sessions, right? So, but at first I didn't know what they were, and one of the dominant light beings was this violet light, which Shasta is known for. And I didn't know what it was. So I thought there was something wrong with my phone, and and so I remember the first time capturing this violet light, it was like Star Trek and Beam Me Up Scotty, that pillar where you go
Yes.
beamed up, and the bandwidth was really wide and it was going zzz. I'm like, no, it's not happening. This is kind of strange. And my friend at the time, we had iPhone 4s. Okay, so it's kind of back in 2013. All right, kind of dating myself. But it didn't show up in her phone. And we were both shooting at the same time. And I was like, okay, what's going on? Like there's something going on where I keep capturing these light beings and I could see faces in them as well. And so I had talked to a friend of mine and showed her the photos. Her name is Morningstar Gali, and she's part of the Pit River tribe over there. And she's like, "Oh yeah, those lights, yeah, they show up when the medicine person is ready." And I was like, "Oh, hmm." And there was another like sinking feeling, like, "Oh no." It's like, "Oh no," Yeah, yeah, yeah. And in Kuramayama, they would have these like tengu spirits, and they're kind of like tricksters. And those were showing up in my camera as well. Yeah. So it's like I feel like, if you're ready and you're open, these light beings show up and they're all over Shasta.
Mhm.
And just I mean, it's hard to put in words what it's. I think, I'm all about the Buddhist way, direct experience. You just go there, okay? You go and have your experience. You tell me how it was for you.
Right.
I will tell you, for some folks who go, it's hard to leave because it's so powerful and it's so beautiful. And, it's also the land of the Winnemem Wintu. And I want to definitely cannot talk about Shasta without talking about the Winnemem Wintu tribe. They're the folks who were essentially originally along the McCloud River, what is now the McCloud River, but it's the Winnemem Waywacket. It's the waterways. There's the lower falls, middle falls, and upper falls. And then there's the Shasta Dam that was put up by the government, and they had flooded all their sacred sites. And they were
Wow.
supposed to give them other lands, but they never did. And that fight is still going on. And then the salmon has been blocked from returning to their original waterways. And so this campaign called Run for Salmon that I've been a part of has been going on for now, I think 6, 7 years now. Yeah, and it's another example of sacred activism. where we're trying to return to the sacred and the original indigenous life ways. And that by saving that, it saves everybody, from the salmon to all the creatures that's along the waterways, all the lands and all the people, And so I actually, because it's all about reciprocity, I had asked the Chief Kaling Sisk, if we could practice on her waterways, and in return for reciprocity, granting us permission to practice Reiki there, a certain portion of the tuition goes to her tribe. And that is my wish, that everybody practices in that way. That how do we be in right relationship? Okay, I'm on Winnemem land. I'm going to check in with the chief, ask for permission, offer her tobacco that I grow myself for ceremony, make that offering, ask for the permission. And then, and that's how we come in. We may or may not get permission, but that's the way I feel like we all need to do. It's all deep reverence. It's all about a practice of reverence. And the Japanese are all about reverence. How many times do they bow a day? I mean, I grew up bowing all the time. It's about deep reverence. It's about relationship. It's about connection and respect. So it's,
oh my goodness, Marie, we need like 3 hours together. I mean, because so much of what you're saying, one, I mean, it's just, my heart is like cracking open at just the beauty of what you're sharing. But even this last bit of what you're saying of us being in right relationship and to practice this way and to have a reverence, I'm thankful that you're using these words even to relate them even back to not just our way of being, but understanding that this is a big aspect of Reiki. Because I think a lot of times people think of Reiki as this very just like a technical system technique,
right.
And not looking at the expression of what it's pointing us to and what it's reminding us of. And the opportunity we have to recognize that relationship with self, relationship to all, relationship to nature, relation to your brother, relation, right?
Yeah,
and so you're speaking, yes, all my relations. And you're really highlighting like the pinnacle of what this practice really is that is often unspoken. I mean, if you ask someone what Reiki is, that probably isn't going to be what they say. So it's just very exciting to hear you to share what you're sharing in the way that you are. Okay, again, trying to make sure we get all this in your juicy story.
I feel like we're just getting started. Like, really, we need.
I know.
What the heck? I mean, I don't know. You're gonna have to call me back. You're gonna have to do part 2 or something. I don't know.
Seriously, no, we're gonna have to do like part 2, 3, and 4. So you have this beautiful opportunity to have the practice of Reiki and training in this sacred land, and really being in right relationship with even the people that their direct lineage with this land. And you also again bring in these elements of Shinto and what you've learned through the Lakota practices and traditions. So could you share first what Shinto is, a little bit about Shintoism, how that even again is like infused in Reiki if people are unaware, and how all of this contributes to your students being able to learn in nature this way?
Right. Yeah, so much to say about that. And we only have so many minutes left, but
don't look at the clock.
Yeah, don't look at that. Yeah, so in short, obviously, so it's, Shinto is one of Japan's indigenous, spiritual practices, and it definitely is hella tuned into nature, like big time, just the way the Lakota, indigenous communities here on Turtle Island are hooked into nature, and the nature is the kami, it is the source, it is creator, so what I what I find helpful for my students for this training is to come in with some practice that's going to help them basically cleanse themselves and purify, because here we are living in urban densities, the debris, the energetic debris within us, in our heads, in our bodies, is super thick. So I was like, well, why don't we do some purification practices? And it wasn't even like I was even thinking like, oh, let's do purification practices. It was just like, it was like a reflex. It was like, well, we got to just get you cleaned up. So, I get people on the land, we do the tobacco offering, we do the smudging, and then we do a fire ceremony. And in that fire ceremony, I borrow the traditions of the Lakota way, where we call in all the ancestors. And it doesn't matter which tradition you're from, you are calling in your ancestors. If that's not familiar to you, that's okay. Fake it till you make it. But you're putting this fire down. We're going to honor all the, 4 directions, including the benevolent ancestors of the land that we're on, making that tobacco offering, putting down that prayer, calling everybody in. So that's the Lakota part that then also reflects or connects with the Shinto part, which is about honoring nature, because we're in nature, honoring nature. So in that fire ceremony, we're also honoring all the elements, right? Mm-hmm. The water, the creek is right there. The cedar trees are right there. We're calling in the whole team, and then we move into other purification practices. Like the first 2 days, we engage in misogi, which is a water purification ceremony, and it can take many forms. You could do a cold plunge. So we do a cold plunge right there, and it's freezing. People are like, and we also take them to the waterfalls, and that would be the taki is waterfall, gil waterfall, meditation practice. And most people left to their own devices, I'm sure, would not go under a waterfall and hang out there, because it's glacial melt water. It's not comfortable, and it's not supposed to be comfortable. And we need that level of discomfort and getting out of your mind and being totally in the experience to help cleanse that vessel. So we have these practices that are Shinto Shugendo based that helps you show up for the practice, helps you show to be that clear vessel. So you can get on that meditation cushion and you're a little bit more clear, or you're on that Reiki table and you're a little bit more available and not in your head. So I'd like to use these practices as a way to do like an energetic, like debris, like a cleanup, so that people could be squeaky clean and just really get out of their own way and be like, okay, that was like majorly intense.
Yeah.
They're kind of like in shock afterwards, but then they're exhilarated at the same time. Yeah. And then next thing you know, they're like, oh, when are we going to do it again? So I start off each day with a purification practice, so that we do become more available to receive Deju even, right? Yeah. Like,
I love
then
that.
I'll even attune them on a full moon. I try to time it with cosmic events, because we are in the mountains and we are under the star nations and we are harnessing all the elements that are available to us. So why not attune people to the new moon or the full moon, or or the equinox, because it's all there and it's all available.
But it's beautiful even thinking of like that preparation. It kind of echoes back to what you were speaking about in terms of like ritual and sacred ceremony, but also just that beauty of preparation instead of just being thrown into even the space of Reiju. Because if we can approach that with more of an open mind and out of that space, I can imagine that must be pretty intense in an amazing way for people. But another thing you mentioned, Marie, is the calling in the 4 directions, calling in our ancestors. And like, yes, if you don't even know about it yet, just know it is so. And you remind me of recently I heard an interview where there was a man who he was a priest or something, but he did a lot of work in Africa, and I can't remember which country. But one of the things he found was fascinating was that because the people from wherever he was working, they grew up knowing that they were surrounded by their ancestors and their guides, and that they grew up knowing that they were supported in all of these ways. And he was saying how it really did something to them in a psychological way versus in the West, where we don't know that we have that support, or we may not have been taught at a young age that we're always surrounded by this higher guidance. And so that's a really cool thing to introduce people to if they are unaware, because that is hugely, I didn't know about my guides till I started this work and found out about them accidentally. And hugely impactful to realize you're not alone in this work.
Absolutely. And then, ancestors are always on standby. They're like, just,
right.
Never get ready, let me know.
That is so true. Okay, so people can come, and you actually are doing the next training in Mount Shasta in June. And I
Right.
mentioned a little earlier that you do have a scholarship for this event that will specifically support queer BIPOC students. So could you talk a little bit about this and how anyone listening could contribute?
Yeah. So, I mean, at the moment it's sold out, but I'm looking to do another one later in the year. But
Okay.
a good number of the students, because I do focus on the queer, trans, BIPOC community and just really changing the landscape of wellness and trying to really get this practice into the hands of, people like us. And just trying to create more of an equalizing field. I created this uh, fundraiser on GoFundMe, and I'll send you the link later. And maybe folks who feel called to help
Right.
will make a little donation.
Yeah.
But oh, I kind of lost my train of thought. Where was I going with that? So the training, yes, is happening. It's predominantly queer, trans, and BIPOC folks that I work with, and this training that I'm doing in June is also, I'm hoping to repeat it in September or sometime in the fall. And if folks are interested, they could definitely check out my website, and I have the sort of breakdown of the curriculum. And if that resonates for you, definitely give me a holler, send me an email, and I'll put you on the wait list. But it's a very special, yeah, it's a very special training. It's not for everybody because it does have a lot of the Shugendo aspects of ascetic training and being out there in the elements. And it's not necessarily about being comfortable, but comfortable enough, you
Yes.
know? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, that's amazing. And of course, please send me the link because I will include it down in the show description because I'm sure a lot of people would absolutely love to contribute. And it's just amazing the work that you're doing, Marie, and that it sounds like those waterfalls have broken down a lot of your resistance because whatever it was you were resisting, you were doing it anyway. Um, I I wanted to ask you one more thing before we go. Just curious from your lens, because again, you had this opportunity of being a nisei. Is that
Mhm,
yes? Um, second generation, is that?
mhm. Like
Yeah,
ichi
second.
nisan, ise ni nisei means two. Yeah.
Okay, nisei. Okay, so second generation here, but also having your mother make sure that the traditions were very much instilled in you. Yeah, just that's phenomenal. Because a lot of people don't get that opportunity, right? But just like how we were mentioning in the beginning, that you also had this beautiful opportunity of being welcomed into the Lakota tribe and being able to participate in their ceremonies. Just curious, your point of view, even being in a Reiki class together and seeing how now a lot of the traditions from your culture being taught and expressed, maybe still we don't fully understand, but still a lot of what is more traditional to you and your background and your lineage, and seeing how it is being spread in such a way that so many people are being able to benefit from this. Do you have any feeling around that? Like, what is that like for you, witnessing it, being a part of it, even? Just curious.
Yeah, it's a very gray zone. I mean,
Hmm.
because Usui Sensei did say in the beginning, this is for everybody, and he
Yes.
wants to spread it throughout the world.
Yep.
So I understand inevitably when it jumps cultures, it takes on the context of that culture, and
Yes.
things get lost, things get added, things get changed. And having that practice come here to the US, it's definitely been super westernized, that to the point where people they didn't even know it was from Japan, right?
Right.
And then there's that whole colonization process. I mean, we could talk about, that's a whole other episode as well.
Yeah.
I mean, when Japan lost the war in World War II, their whole identity just kind of went, and started to get colonized and westernized to the point where, they were like, ooh, Reiki, that's kind of, what's that? That's like ghosts and heebie-jeebies, and I don't know what that's about. When that in
Right.
fact is just, is a spiritual practice. That's our indigenous practice, and a lot of countries have gone through that. Like, for example, even Mexico, like the Spaniards came and, forced Christianity on them, and they put the Christian churches on top of the sacred sites. And like the documented workers, they went and they like the ones that I worked with at the Tubbs Fire, they didn't even know what limpias were. And they were kind of heebie-jeebied about it. But then once,
Right.
the limpia plant hit them, that DNA kicked in and they was like, oh, I'm home. Right.
Right.
So I feel like all the different mutations and generations that Reiki has it's taken. I mean, ultimately, obviously, it's a healing practice, and my wish is that everybody learns the origin story. Everybody learns how to be connected to nature. Everybody learns what it is to be in deep reverence. These are really basic, but we've kind of lost that along the ways when capitalism entered the picture, right? So yeah, there's just so much to say. There's so much to say. There's so much to say about appropriation and what has happened with the practice. But I feel like, there are also a lot of white allies who are doing the work,
Yeah.
and those are the folks that are going to teach other white folks how to, and not make us do all the emotional labor of explaining it all. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
yes. Yes.
Yeah. So, and I feel like there's enough of those folks around that are doing that good work. So really it's about walking with integrity and stepping out of the way and not having it be an ego practice. And that's really the crux of it. Japanese culture is very much about being humble, you know, it's all about being humble. And if you're all up in your ego, everyone's kind of like, oh, you know,
Yeah.
you get
Yeah.
silent stare down, like, so you do your
Well,
best to stay small and don't stick out, and don't all be up in your me, my ego. So there's a lot of good practices that I think we need to return to, and it's a return to the sacred, really.
yeah. Well,
What it
that's the
really
thing
is.
I think is so fascinating. I mean, across the board, uh, so many people now, especially the younger generations, there is this like resurgence of ancestral practices, reconnecting to lineage, reconnecting to an understanding, even like different indigenous practices, like through so many cultures. And I recently, actually, the podcast just aired recently. I spoke with a woman who was talking about hoodoo traditions and how a lot was obviously taken away during the slave trade and all of this. But in terms of spirituality and indigenous practices and beliefs and all of this, but it's amazing how it's all resurfacing now, and how now, because of technology and the way that we're in communication, we're all getting some insight into these practices, these teachings. But more phenomenally is that it all points back to the same thing. And
Yes.
it's like we really have such a precious opportunity in these times that we live in to
Yes.
recognize this opportunity of returning to one and community and connection and all the things that you spoke about throughout this conversation. Oh, Marie, so you're coming back, right?
Yeah. Just let me know when's a good time for you, girl. I'm there.
I can't thank you enough for this conversation and sharing your story and what you have been learning along the way. I just want everyone to know that they can learn more about you and your work at Starnation Reiki on Instagram, but also your website is starnationreiki.com. And we will have the links below for the scholarship as well. Ooh. Is there
Awesome.
anything else you wanted to say before
Oh
we
my
go?
God. Jesus. So much to say other than yeah, be in the love.
Yeah,
Yeah,
be
just
in love.
be in the love of it all, especially when it's the hardest. When it's the hardest, when it's the hardest. Ah,
That should be on a t-shirt, Marie. I
ah.
expect to
Oh,
see
I
it.
do have a good mantra.
Oh, you do? Okay,
Yeah.
please.
In these times when people are tripping and having all kinds of anxiety, it seems I have this mantra of don't trip, just trust.
Ooh, don't trip, just trust.
Yeah,
I love that. I
yeah,
love that.
yeah,
Now
yeah.
that you should put on a t-shirt.
Yeah, because that's what made me think of that mantra. Because I was like, oh yeah, because my students would say, oh, well, that should be a T-shirt.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there was quite a few different things that you said throughout the conversation that should be, and I'm sure that um, everyone listening will have a lot of inspiration and consideration for their own practices and just how we are being in this world. And I thank you very much for coming. For everyone else, go to starnationreiki.com and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Yolanda. And we'll talk again soon.
Yes. Oh, we have to.
Yes.
Bye for
We're
now.
going to carry on. We're going to carry on.
Okay, beautiful alchemist. I want to thank Marie again of Star Nation Reiki. So don't forget, if you want to learn more about Marie and her beautiful work, her beautiful offerings, go to starnationreiki.com, or you can also find her on Instagram at Star Nation Reiki. And if you would like to contribute to the scholarship fund for the queer BIPOC students for her retreats in Mount Shasta, the link for that will be below as well. Yeah, the conversations, I swear, sometimes it just goes by so quick, and I wish we had more time to dig more deeply into the stories. But I would love to hear what's coming up for you. Is there anything you would like to discuss from this episode or any recent episodes of Reiki Radio? Is there anything you just want to ask, share, or chat about in relation to your practice? If you would like to, you can join me live for the Reiki Roundtable Tuesdays at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And again, you can get the link in the Energetic Alchemist app. So be sure to download the app. I thank you so much for being here. And if you want your copy of the Energetic Alchemist Oracle, go to my website and get your copy of the deck now. So that's it for this week, loves. I will see you next time. Remember to always journey in love.